Throughout history, there are princes born to rule and princes born to lose everything. In the turbulent landscape of 19th century Europe, where kingdoms rose and fell with each passing war, one man's birthright would become his curse. His name was Prince Frederick of Schleswig-Holstein Sonderburg, Augustenburg, and from the moment he drew his first breath on July 6, 1829, at Augustenborg Palace in Denmark, he was destined for a throne that would slip through his fingers like sand. Frederick was born into one of Europe's most complicated royal puzzles. His father, Christian August II, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein Sonderburg, Augustenburg, belonged to the House of Oldenburg, the ancient dynasty that had ruled Denmark for centuries. His mother, Countess Louise Sophie of Dynasty descended from Danish high nobility, making Frederick perhaps the most ethnically Danish prince of his generation. Historians suggest this ancestry was carefully calculated, as his family groomed him not just to be a duke, but to become King of Denmark itself. The irony was breathtaking. While Frederick's bloodline ran thick with Danish royal heritage, his destiny would align him with German nationalism against his own ancestral homeland. According to contemporary accounts, his family viewed his pure Danish lineage as their greatest political weapon in an era when nationalism was reshaping Europe's borders. If you're finding this story of royal ambition and betrayal fascinating, make sure to subscribe for more hidden histories of Europe's forgotten princes, because Frederick's tale of loss has only just begun. The duchies of Schleswig and Holstein were no ordinary inheritance. These twin territories straddled the border between Danish and German cultures, creating a powder keg of competing loyalties. Holstein, governed by Salic law, could only pass to male heirs, while Schleswig followed different succession rules that allowed female inheritance. When King Frederick VII of Denmark ascended the throne in 1848 without hope of producing a male heir, it triggered a succession crisis that would consume Frederick's entire life. Documents from the period reveal that Frederick's family had been preparing for this moment for decades. His father had positioned their branch of the House of Oldenburg as the rightful heirs to the duchies should the Danish royal line fail. According to surviving correspondence, they believed Frederick's impeccable Danish ancestry would legitimize their claim in the eyes of both Danish nobles and the great powers of Europe. But ambition and bloodline meant nothing without military might. In 1848, as revolutionary fervor swept across Europe, Frederick's father made a decision that would doom his son's future. He placed himself at the head of a German nationalist movement to resist Danish control over Schleswig-Holstein by force, transforming his family from potential heirs into enemies of the Danish crown. According to military records, Frederick was thrust into this conflict as a teenager, watching his inheritance turn into a battlefield. The provisional government named his father as Minister of War, while Frederick observed the early battles that would define his generation. Reports from the time describe a young prince caught between two identities, his Danish blood and his German political allegiance. What Frederick couldn't know was that this decision would set in motion a chain of betrayals that would destroy everything his family had built over centuries, because the allies his father trusted most would soon become the architects of their downfall. The year 1848 would forever divide Frederick's life into before and after. As revolutionary fires spread across Europe, toppling monarchs and redrawing maps, the 19-year-old prince watched his father transform from a loyal duke into a rebel general. Christian August II had made his choice. He would rather fight for German independence than bow to Danish rule. For Frederick, this decision meant trading a palace for a battlefield, a crown for a cause that would consume everything he held dear. According to military records from the provisional government, Frederick's father assumed the role of Minister of War in March 1848, commanding the duchy's hastily assembled army during the First Schleswig War. Contemporary accounts describe Christian August as a man driven by principle rather than pragmatism, believing that German nationalism could overcome Danish military superiority. Frederick, still learning the art of statecraft, found himself thrust into the inner circles of a war his family could not afford to lose. The early months brought hope. Prussian troops marched south to support the Schleswig-Holstein cause, and it appeared that the great German Confederation would stand behind Frederick's father. Military dispatches from the period reveal initial optimism among the rebel commanders, who believed they were fighting for a just cause that would reshape Northern Europe. Frederick watched as his father's provisional government gained recognition from smaller German states, each victory seeming to bring the dream of an independent Schleswig-Holstein closer to reality. But war has a way of revealing harsh truths about loyalty and power. By 1849, Prussia began to withdraw its support, prioritizing its relationship with other European powers over the Schleswig-Holstein cause. According to diplomatic correspondence from the time, Frederick witnessed his father's growing desperation as former allies abandoned the rebellion. The prince, who had once dreamed of ruling a kingdom, now watched helplessly as that kingdom crumbled around him. The collapse came gradually, then all at once. Danish forces, bolstered by the withdrawal of Prussian support, began systematically retaking territory. Contemporary reports describe the brutal efficiency of Danish reprisals against those who had supported the rebellion. Villages that had cheered Frederick's father were occupied, their leaders imprisoned or exiled. The provisional government that had seemed so promising in 1848 became a government in exile by 1851. Historical records show that Frederick's education in royal power ended abruptly when his family was forced to flee their ancestral home. The prince who had been groomed for greatness found himself stateless, watching from foreign soil as Danish forces reclaimed Augustenborg Palace. According to surviving documents, the family's exile was particularly humiliating because they had been defeated not just militarily, but politically abandoned by their supposed allies. By 1851, the First Schleswig War was over, and Frederick's father faced an impossible choice. The Danish government demanded more than surrender. They wanted complete renunciation of any future claims to the duchies. For a family that had spent decades building their legitimacy, this was political suicide. Yet refusing meant permanent exile and the destruction of everything they had built. Frederick watched as his father wrestled with a decision that would determine not just their family's fate, but the very existence of their dynasty. Because what happened next would reveal just how far powerful men would go to destroy those who dared to dream of thrones. The Danish succession crisis of the 1850s was a chess game played with kingdoms as pawns, and Frederick found himself at the center of a puzzle that would determine the fate of Northern Europe. While his father grappled with the humiliation of military defeat, the larger question remained unresolved. Who would inherit the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein when King Frederick VII of Denmark died childless? The answer would either restore Frederick's dynasty or bury it forever. According to legal scholars of the period, the succession laws created an almost impossible tangle of competing claims. Denmark itself followed the Lex Regia of 1665, which allowed inheritance through female lines, meaning the throne could pass to a princess or her descendants. But Holstein, as part of the German Confederation, operated under Salic law, which strictly prohibited female inheritance. Schleswig fell into a legal gray area, with competing interpretations about whether Danish or German law applied. Contemporary diplomatic correspondence reveals that European powers watched this crisis with growing alarm. The balance of power in the Baltic Sea hung in the balance, with Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Britain all having strategic interests in the outcome. For Frederick, this meant his family's ancient claims were now subject to international politics rather than simple hereditary law. Documents from the Danish royal court show that King Frederick VII's government was actively working to prevent Frederick's family from ever returning to power. The Royal Council had identified Prince Christian of Glücksburg, a distant cousin with different political loyalties, as their preferred successor. According to surviving minutes from these meetings, Danish officials viewed Frederick's German nationalist sympathies as a permanent threat to Danish sovereignty over the duchies. Meanwhile, Frederick's supporters argued that his claims were legally superior to any competitor. Historical records from the period show that the House of Augustenborg had maintained detailed genealogical documentation proving their position as the senior male line of the House of Oldenburg. Legal briefs prepared by German scholars argued that Frederick's father's forced renunciation in 1852 was invalid because it had been extracted under military duress. The financial settlement that accompanied his father's renunciation tells its own story. According to treasury documents, Denmark paid the enormous sum of 619 Zoner Rigsdaler to Christian August II for abandoning his claims. Such a massive payment suggests Danish officials understood the legal strength of the Augustenburg position. They were essentially buying their way out of a succession crisis they might otherwise lose. But Frederick and his supporters found a crucial loophole. Legal experts argued that since Frederick himself had never personally renounced his claims, his father's agreement could not bind the next generation. According to correspondence from German legal scholars, this interpretation gained significant support among the smaller German states, who saw Frederick as a weapon against growing Prussian dominance. The irony was devastating. Frederick's strongest claim was to Holstein, the German-speaking duchy, while his weakest was to Schleswig, which contained substantial Danish populations. Yet his family's strategy required claiming both duchies as an indivisible unit, making compromise impossible. By the late 1850s, European courts whispered about the coming storm. Intelligence reports from the period indicate that major powers were already choosing sides for the conflict that would inevitably erupt when King Frederick VII died. Because when that moment came, Frederick would discover that legal rights meant nothing without the military power to enforce them. March 31st, 1852 became the day Frederick's world collapsed. His father, Christian August II, sat in a room surrounded by Danish officials and signed away 3 centuries of family claims to Schleswig and Holstein. The massive sum of 619 Rigsdaler sat on the table. Blood money for a dynasty suicide. For Frederick, watching his father's signature destroy their legacy, this was more than political defeat. It was the ultimate betrayal by the one power they had trusted above all others, Prussia. According to diplomatic archives from Berlin, Prussia had orchestrated this humiliation with calculated precision. After initially supporting the Schleswig-Holstein cause in 1848, Prussian officials gradually withdrew their backing as international pressure mounted. Contemporary correspondence reveals that Prussian ministers viewed Frederick's father as a useful tool that had outlived its purpose. Better to sacrifice the Augustenburg claims than risk war with Britain and Russia over the duchies. The method of betrayal was particularly cruel. Documents from the period show that Prussian representatives had privately assured Frederick's father of continued support, while simultaneously negotiating with Denmark behind his back. Military reports indicate that Prussia had been secretly coordinating with Danish forces to ensure the rebellion's defeat, transforming allies into executioners with devastating efficiency. Frederick witnessed his father's psychological destruction during those final negotiations. According to surviving accounts from family members, Christian August aged years in weeks, realizing that the Prussian promises that had sustained him through years of exile were worthless. The prince who had once commanded armies now sat powerless as foreign diplomats dictated the terms of his surrender. Tell me in the comments what part of this story shocks you the most so far. And if you're enjoying this documentary, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this about the hidden betrayals that shaped European history. The renunciation document itself reveals the scope of the family's humiliation. Legal texts from 1852 show that Christian August was forced to abandon not just his own claims, but explicitly renounce any future rights in perpetuity for his descendants. Danish negotiators, according to treaty records, insisted on language that would legally bind Frederick himself, even though he was not present during the negotiations. But the Prussian betrayal went deeper than mere political opportunism. Intelligence reports from the period suggest that Prussia had been planning to eventually annex the duchies for itself, making Frederick's family inconvenient claimants to territories Berlin wanted to control directly. According to ministerial correspondence, Prussian officials saw the Augustenburg dynasty as obstacles to their broader strategy of German unification under Prussian leadership. The financial settlement told its own story of Danish desperation and Prussian calculation. Treasury documents reveal that the 619 rigsdaler represented nearly 10% of Denmark's annual budget, an astronomical sum that demonstrated how seriously Copenhagen took the Augustenburg threat. Yet Prussia, which could have matched or exceeded this payment to maintain their allies, chose instead to watch them be bought off. Frederick's response to his father's signature would define the rest of his life. Contemporary observers noted that the young prince emerged from the crisis transformed, no longer the idealistic heir, but a hardened claimant who understood that royal birthright meant nothing without military power. According to family correspondence, Frederick privately swore that his father's renunciation would not bind him, a decision that would resurrect their dynasty's claims when Europe least expected it. Because while his father had signed away their present, Frederick was already planning to reclaim their future. And when King Frederick VII of Denmark finally died in 1863, the prince who had lost everything would make one final, desperate bid for the crown that had always been his. Some defeats are military, others are personal. But few men in history have endured the specific humiliation that awaited Frederick in the aftermath of his father's renunciation. As news of the family's capitulation spread across Denmark, the public's reaction went beyond political opposition. It became a campaign of deliberate, calculated degradation designed to ensure the Augustenburg name would be forever associated with shame. The most notorious symbol of this hatred came in the form of chamber pots. According to newspaper advertisements from 1852, Danish merchants began mass-producing ceramic vessels featuring Frederick's portrait painted on the bottom. Historical records show these became wildly popular across Denmark, allowing citizens to literally defecate on the image of the prince who had dared claim their duchies. Contemporary accounts describe Danish households proudly displaying these vessels as patriotic symbols of their rejection of German claims. This wasn't mere political satire, it was psychological warfare. Documents from the period reveal that Danish officials actively encouraged this form of public mockery as a way to permanently discredit the Augustenburg dynasty. According to surviving correspondence between government ministers, they understood that military defeat wasn't enough. Frederick's reputation had to be destroyed so thoroughly that any future claims would be met with ridicule rather than respect. The humiliation extended far beyond chamber pots. Press reports from Danish newspapers describe public celebrations where Frederick's effigy was burned in town squares, accompanied by songs mocking his family's pretensions to royalty. According to police records, these demonstrations sometimes turned violent when supporters of the Augustenburg cause attempted to intervene, creating a cycle of hatred that poisoned Danish-German relations throughout the 1850s. Frederick's exile during this period became a form of social death. Contemporary diplomatic reports indicate that European courts, once receptive to Augustenburg claims, now viewed the family as political pariahs whose association could damage other rulers' reputations. According to embassy correspondence, Frederick found himself excluded from royal gatherings and state functions, reduced to the status of a footnote in the very circles where he had once expected to rule. The psychological toll was devastating. Family letters from the period, though carefully worded to avoid giving enemies ammunition, hint at Frederick's growing bitterness and isolation. According to accounts from visitors to the family's modest residence in exile, the prince, who had once been groomed for kingship, now spent his days consumed with plans for restoration, studying maps of territories he no longer controlled and maintaining correspondence with a dwindling circle of supporters. But the cruelest irony was yet to come. Intelligence reports from German states show that Frederick's humiliation in Denmark actually increased his symbolic value to German nationalists. The more Danes mocked him, the more he became a rallying point for German pride. According to political correspondence from the period, Frederick began to realize that his suffering could be transformed into political capital, that every chamber pot sold in Denmark was evidence of Danish barbarism that justified German intervention. This growing martyrdom would prove crucial when the moment for revenge finally arrived. Because Frederick was learning that sometimes the greatest weapon against your enemies is allowing them to reveal their true nature. And when King Frederick VII of Denmark died in November 1863, the prince whose image had been dragged through the mud would emerge from exile ready to reclaim his birthright, no matter the cost. November 15th, 1863. King Frederick VII of Denmark was dead, and with his final breath, Europe's most volatile succession crisis exploded into open warfare. Frederick had waited 11 years for this moment. 11 years of exile, humiliation, and burning resentment. Now, standing in his modest quarters, far from the duchies he claimed, the prince who had been mocked and forgotten, prepared to make his final bid for power. On November 18th, just 3 days after the Danish king's death, Frederick issued a proclamation that would ignite the Second Schleswig War. He was now Friedrich VIII, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein. According to surviving copies of the proclamation, Frederick's declaration was carefully crafted to emphasize his legal rights while appealing to German nationalist sentiment. The document argued that his father's 1852 renunciation was invalid, and that as the rightful male heir of the House of Oldenburg, Frederick's claims superseded any Danish attempts to install alternative rulers. Contemporary reports show that news of his proclamation spread rapidly through German newspapers, generating enthusiasm among populations who had been waiting over a decade for revenge against Denmark. The initial response seemed to validate Frederick's gamble. Historical records show that several smaller German states, including Saxony and Hanover, immediately recognized his claim to the duchies. According to diplomatic correspondence, the German Confederation itself expressed support for Frederick's position, though stopping short of formal recognition. Military reports from the period indicate that volunteer regiments from across Germany began forming to support what they saw as a war of German liberation against Danish oppression. For a brief, shining moment, Frederick appeared to be winning. Intelligence reports from early 1864 show that Danish forces in the duchies were outnumbered and demoralized, while German public opinion strongly favored the Augustenburg cause. According to contemporary newspaper accounts, Frederick's supporters believed they were witnessing the restoration of a dynasty that had been unjustly destroyed by international conspiracy. But Frederick's hope rested on a fatal miscalculation about his supposed allies. While Prussia and Austria had joined the war against Denmark in February 1864, military dispatches reveal they were fighting for their own territorial ambitions, not for Frederick's restoration. Contemporary correspondence between Prussian and Austrian commanders shows they viewed Frederick as a useful propaganda tool rather than a legitimate claimant they intended to support. The war itself was swift and brutal. Danish forces, despite valiant resistance, were systematically overwhelmed by the combined might of Prussia and Austria. Military records show that German forces captured key fortifications and advanced deep into Danish territory, achieving the decisive victories that had eluded Frederick's father in the 1840s. According to battle reports, Danish resistance collapsed by summer 1864, with Copenhagen forced to sue for peace. Frederick watched his moment of triumph transform into devastating betrayal. The Treaty of Vienna, signed in October 1864, awarded the duchies not to Frederick, but to Prussia and Austria as joint administrators. According to the treaty's text, Frederick's claims were ignored entirely, his supposed allies revealing their true intentions only after Danish resistance had been crushed. Once again, Frederick found himself a prince without a kingdom, betrayed by the very powers that had used his name to justify their conquest. But this time, the betrayal would prove even more complete than he could have imagined. The final blow came not from an enemy, but from the ally Frederick had trusted most. In 1866, just 2 years after Prussia had helped crush Denmark in his name, Otto von Bismarck revealed the true scope of his ambition. The Austro-Prussian War erupted in June 1866, and when the smoke cleared 7 weeks later, Frederick discovered that his ancestral lands had been devoured by the very power that had promised to restore them. According to military records from the conflict, the war's outcome was never in doubt. Prussian forces, modernized and equipped with breech-loading rifles, systematically destroyed Austrian armies at battles like Königgrätz. Contemporary accounts describe Austrian resistance collapsing so rapidly that European observers were stunned by the scope of Prussian military superiority. For Frederick, watching from his exile, each Prussian victory brought him closer to total dispossession. The Treaty of Prague, signed on August 23, 1866, contained language that destroyed Frederick's dreams with bureaucratic precision. According to the treaty's text, Austria formally renounced all rights to the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, transferring complete control to Prussia. Historical records show that Frederick's name wasn't even mentioned in the document. He had been erased from his own inheritance with the stroke of a pen. Bismarck's strategy revealed itself as a masterpiece of cynical manipulation. Intelligence reports from the period show that Prussian officials had been planning the annexation since 1864, using Frederick's claims as justification for the initial war against Denmark, while never intending to honor them. According to diplomatic correspondence, Bismarck viewed the duchies as crucial to Prussian control of the Baltic Sea approaches, and was determined to prevent any independent rule that might challenge Berlin's authority. The legal justification for the seizure was particularly humiliating. Government documents from Berlin argue that since Frederick had proclaimed himself Duke without Prussian consent, his claims were invalid under German Confederation law. Contemporary legal opinions prepared by Prussian jurists claimed that the duchies had rightfully reverted to Prussia as the dominant German power, making Frederick's family irrelevant to the succession question. Frederick's response to this ultimate betrayal was one of stunned disbelief. Family correspondence from the period, though carefully censored, reveals a man struggling to comprehend how completely he had been outmaneuvered. According to accounts from visitors, Frederick spent months reviewing legal documents and historical precedents, desperately searching for some mechanism that might restore his rights. But Bismarck had planned for every contingency. Prussian administrators moved swiftly to integrate the duchies into their existing governmental structure, creating the new province of Schleswig-Holstein on December 24, 1866. According to administrative records, Prussian officials deliberately excluded any representatives from Frederick's supporters, ensuring that local power structures would be loyal to Berlin rather than the dispossessed Augustenburg dynasty. The transformation was swift and total. Within months, Prussian law replaced local customs. Prussian currency circulated in markets that had known his family's rule for centuries, and Prussian officials occupied the very offices where Frederick's ancestors had governed. Contemporary observers noted that Prussia had achieved through politics what Denmark had failed to accomplish through war: the complete elimination of Augustenburg influence in the duchies. Frederick now faced a choice that would define his final years: accept his defeat gracefully, or wage a hopeless struggle against the most powerful state in Germany. Because Bismarck had left him with nothing except his titles and his bitterness. After 1866, Frederick entered a form of living death. Stripped of his duchies, abandoned by his allies, and forgotten by the European powers that had once courted his support, he became what historians would later call the last of the dispossessed princes. A man whose entire identity had been built around ruling territories that no longer recognized his existence. At 37 years old, Frederick faced a question that would torment him for the remaining 14 years of his life. What does a prince do when he has no kingdom to rule? According to financial records from the period, Frederick's circumstances were dramatically reduced from his family's former grandeur. The massive Danish settlement from 1852 had been largely exhausted by years of exile and political maneuvering, leaving the self-proclaimed duke dependent on modest rental income from remaining family properties. Contemporary accounts describe a man who maintained the appearances of royalty while living on resources that would barely sustain a minor nobleman. Yet Frederick refused to abandon his claims. Legal documents from the late 1860s show that he continued to style himself Duke of Schleswig-Holstein in all official correspondence, maintaining a shadow court of loyal supporters who addressed him with royal honors despite his lack of actual authority. According to visitors' accounts, Frederick's modest residence became a shrine to his lost inheritance, filled with maps of the duchies, portraits of his ancestors, and legal briefs arguing for his restoration. The psychological toll of this existence was evident to those who knew him. Family correspondence from the 1870s, though carefully diplomatic, hints at Frederick's growing isolation and bitterness. According to contemporary observers, he aged rapidly during this period. The stress of maintaining royal dignity while possessing no real power, taking its toll on both his health and his relationships with the few supporters who remained loyal. Frederick's marriage to Princess Adelheid of Hohenlohe-Langenburg in 1856 provided some stability, but even his domestic life was overshadowed by his political obsessions. Historical records show that their children grew up in the strange twilight world of a court in exile, raised to believe in their father's royal status while being educated for lives as minor German nobles. According to family accounts, Frederick insisted that his children be prepared to assume their rightful positions should political circumstances change. The broader political landscape offered little hope for restoration. Diplomatic correspondence from major European capitals shows that by the 1870s, Frederick's claims were viewed as relics of a bygone era. Prussia's successful unification of Germany under Kaiser Wilhelm II had created a new political reality in which dispossessed princes like Frederick were seen as obstacles to progress rather than legitimate alternatives to existing arrangements. Perhaps most painfully, Frederick watched as his former territories prospered under Prussian rule. Economic reports from the new province of Schleswig-Holstein show increasing trade, industrial development, and administrative efficiency that contrasted sharply with the political chaos of the pre-1866 period. According to contemporary analyses, Prussian integration had brought the very stability and prosperity that Frederick had promised but never delivered. As the 1870s progressed, Frederick's health began to fail, and with it, the last hopes that his dynasty might somehow reclaim its birthright. Because time was running out for the prince, who had lost everything in pursuit of a crown that was never truly his. By the mid-1870s, Frederick had become a ghost, haunting the margins of European politics. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871 and the subsequent proclamation of the German Empire had created a new continental order in which dispossessed princes were not just irrelevant, they were embarrassing reminders of a feudal past that the modern world had left behind. At 41, Frederick watched helplessly as history moved forward without him, his claims becoming increasingly meaningless in an age of unified nation-states and industrial power. The transformation of Germany into an empire under Prussian leadership dealt the final blow to Frederick's political relevance. According to diplomatic records, European chancelleries that had once maintained correspondence with Frederick now ignored him entirely, focusing instead on relations with the Kaiser and his ministers. Contemporary accounts describe a man who continued to monitor international affairs obsessively, searching newspapers for any mention of Schleswig-Holstein, while knowing that his own role in those territories' future had ended forever. Frederick's children began to drift away from their father's political obsessions as they came of age. Historical records show that his eldest daughter, Augusta Victoria, married Wilhelm II in 1881, becoming Empress of Germany and achieving the royal status that had eluded her father. According to family correspondence, Frederick took pride in his daughter's elevation, while simultaneously recognizing the bitter irony that she would rule the very empire that had destroyed his own claims. The isolation deepened with each passing year. Visitors' accounts from the late 1870s describe Frederick as increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours in his study, surrounded by legal documents and genealogical charts that proved his rights to territories that no longer acknowledged his existence. According to contemporary observers, he aged dramatically during this period, his hair turning white and his health declining under the weight of perpetual disappointment. Frederick's court in exile shrank to a handful of elderly supporters who shared his memories of better times. Financial records indicate that even maintaining this modest establishment strained his resources, forcing him to sell family heirlooms and properties to sustain the appearances of royal dignity. According to household accounts, The man who had once expected to rule over hundreds of thousands now struggled to pay the salaries of a few loyal servants. The broader world moved on without him. Economic reports from the 1870s show Schleswig-Holstein thriving under Prussian administration, its ports bustling with trade, and its cities growing with industrial development. According to contemporary analyses, the duchies had achieved under foreign rule the prosperity and stability that centuries of local nobility had failed to deliver. For Frederick, reading these reports must have been a daily reminder of his irrelevance. Perhaps most painfully, Frederick began to understand that his own supporters were aging and dying without replacement. Political correspondence from the period shows that younger generations of Germans and Danes alike viewed his claims as historical curiosities rather than living political issues. According to newspaper reports, Frederick's name appeared in print less and less frequently, until he became a footnote in his own story. As 1879 turned to 1880, Frederick's health took a decisive turn for the worse. Medical records suggest that decades of stress and disappointment had taken their toll, leaving the once vigorous prince a shadow of his former self. Because the final chapter was approaching for the man who had spent his entire adult life pursuing a crown that had always been just beyond his reach. January 14th, 1880. In a modest room in Wiesbaden, far from the duchies he had claimed to rule, Prince Frederick of Schleswig-Holstein, Sonderburg, Augustenburg, drew his final breath. He was 50 years old, and he died as he had lived for the past 14 years. A king without a kingdom, a duke without duchies, a prince whose royal dreams had been buried beneath the weight of European realpolitik. With his death, one of history's most tragic royal stories finally reached its end. According to medical records from his final days, Frederick's health had deteriorated rapidly throughout the winter of 1879 to 1880. Contemporary accounts describe a man worn down by decades of disappointment and frustration, his body finally succumbing to the psychological toll of a lifetime spent pursuing an impossible dream. His family gathered around his deathbed, but even in those final moments, Frederick reportedly maintained his claim to titles he would never truly hold. The funeral arrangements reflected the strange twilight existence Frederick had inhabited for so long. Historical records show that, while he was buried with royal honors befitting a duke, the ceremony was attended by a handful of aging supporters and distant relatives rather than the crowned heads of Europe, who might have mourned a reigning monarch. According to contemporary newspaper reports, Frederick's death was noted briefly in the German press before being quickly forgotten. The cruel irony of Frederick's timing became apparent just months after his burial. His daughter Auguste Victoria's engagement to the future Kaiser Wilhelm II was announced in 1880, meaning that Frederick died just as his family was about to achieve the imperial status he had spent his life pursuing. According to court records, Auguste Victoria became empress of the very German empire that had destroyed her father's claims, ruling from palaces built on the ruins of his ambitions. Frederick's legacy was one of noble failure, in an age that had no patience for noble failures. Historical analyses suggest that his story represents the death throes of feudal Europe, where personal claims to territory meant less than industrial power and military might. According to contemporary political observers, Frederick belonged to a world of medieval succession laws that had been swept away by the forces of nationalism and modernization. Perhaps most tragically, Frederick's greatest success proved to be his ultimate defeat. By helping to trigger the Second Schleswig War through his claims, he had inadvertently provided Prussia with the justification needed to seize the duchies permanently. According to military historians, Frederick's actions accelerated the very process that destroyed his family's ancient rights. The duchies he had loved and lost continued to prosper under Prussian rule, their inhabitants enjoying the stability and prosperity that centuries of dynastic struggle had denied them. Economic records show that by 1880, Schleswig-Holstein had become one of the most developed regions of the new German Empire. Frederick's story reminds us that history belongs to the victors, not the righteous. His claims may have been legally sound, his cause may have been just, but in the end, he learned the hardest lesson of all, that princes without power are simply men with expensive dreams. If you've been moved by this tale of royal ambition and tragic loss, subscribe for more untold stories of Europe's forgotten rulers, because history is full of princes who dreamed of crowns they would never wear.